All right, before we get this episode started, after you watch this, if you enjoy it, please remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and my channel. A big thank you to you for that. Now, here's this week's episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our preseason trail cam review. On this episode, we'll take a look at our trail cam data from the RO360's Central Wisconsin 40-acre hunting acreage, my brother-in-law Craig's property. Plus, we'll break down in depth the data package from those pics that allowed us to put together the final pieces of the puzzle for the fall 2021 deer hunts. Now, if you recall at the end of our last episode, I was so excited that we discovered a natural-made scrape and licking branch along our southwest ATV trail. I quickly added a trail cam to monitor that scrape before we pulled out for the weekend. So we're going to start our trail cam review and data info breakdown with that area's info. Now, the first trail cam picture taken at 11:02 on March 21st was of me as I set up the trail cam. About 5 hours later, we were starting to gather data as these does were checking out the scrape area. Later that evening, we had 2 more does take a close look at the scrape. Then, after a 2-day lull, in the early afternoon of the 24th, we have a doe and a button buck show up. Then later, the night of the 24th, it appears a button buck shows up to take a close look at the scrape and licking branch. Now, based on this button buck showing up and the small size of the scrape, our educated guess is that this button buck made the scrape. But this is an early diagnosis of the limited data. We'll have to let the rest of the data collection play out in order to confirm this. Now, we left that trail camera up from March 21st through May 1st for 42 days. Now, in those 42 days, we had 425 trail cam pics showing animal or bird activity. Now, 382 pictures, or 89.9%, were of deer, which made sense such a large percentage since we were monitoring an active deer scrape area. Now, 351 pics, or 82.6%, were of does, and 31 pics, or 7.3%, were bucks. Now, that's an extremely high doe to buck ratio of 11.3 to 1. A more normal range would be in the 4-5 or even 6 to 1 ratio. But keep in mind, the period of time was short, only 42 days that we had monitored this area. Now, the additional 43 pictures, or 10.1% of all the pictures taken on the trail cam, consisted of turkey, birds, raccoons, and, oh yeah, one of those birds was a sandhill crane. Now, the turkeys accounted for 28 pictures, the birds for 9 pictures, raccoons had 5 pictures. Now, even though there was a lot of doe activity in the area, as you've seen, it takes until April 15th before any deer shows an interest in the scrape or licking branch. Then, this doe shows quite a cautious curiosity in the scrape area. And on the very next day, on the 16th of April, the button buck shows up for the first time since the 25th of March to tend the scrape area again, and he ends up chasing a doe up the trail. Now, was this a coincidence or not? The does continued to frequent the area after the button buck's appearance. But it was strange to see a few turkey hens closely checking out that scrape. Then, in the early morning hours of the 19th, for about 4 minutes, that button buck showed up again to tend the scrape. The next day, on the 20th, this doe appeared in the early morning, and it looked like she paused to enjoy an early sunrise color as daylight crested the trees. Now, later that morning, around 6:30 a.m., there was a curious doe hanging around and checking out the scrape area. And just a few minutes later, that button buck returned to check out the area. And alerted to something, he moved off to the west. 10 minutes later, a couple of does moved into the area. But other than one quick whiff, really showed no interest in the scrape area or its scents. As they moved off towards the west, more does showed up from the east, and that button buck could not have been too far off because he quickly moved back into the scrape area. You can see him in the lower left of the picture frames on the next couple of shots taken. Now, after the does left, he slowly followed down the trail. Now, unfortunately, during the last 11 days that this camera was active at the scrape location, that button buck made no further appearances. Now, during the 56 days that the camera was up, in fact, that was the only buck that showed up at that scrape location, thus confirming our original thoughts that that button buck was probably the buck that originally made the scrape. Now, on May 1st, because of the lack of other buck activity, we decided to pull the camera and move it to other spots on the property that gave us a better opportunity to monitor the bucks moving through the area. Now, during the last 11 days that we had the camera up, we were able to get some additional data intel from this area. So, check this out. On the afternoon of April 21st, we got a photo of a pregnant doe looking robust with fawn. This was great additional intel showing the health of the does in our area. From the 21st of April through May 1st, when we finally pulled a trail cam on this area, we still had a steady flow of doe activity past this trail cam, showing us intel that we may be able to use in our favor. With all these does hanging around on and near our 40 acres, if we can continue to provide for their needs throughout the summer, we can provide a greater choice of breeding opportunities to help draw the bucks this fall. We move now to April 2021 and our trail cam data from our central Wisconsin food plot and some selected trail areas. With the snow melted and spring temperatures on the rise and the green up starting, There was an increase in daylight activity as food source opportunities increased for the deer and turkey. So let's take a look at the action on the trails and the food plot. Late at night on the 17th, our trail cam captured a barred owl on the ground. Looks like it's focused on its next meal. Plentiful doe and buck activity continued on our 40 acres. So much so that with closer contact, tempers started to flare up at times. Trail activity on the cameras picked up as the deer started to reestablish the trail system that they used throughout the property. And by the end of the month, you could start to see a change in the deer's mood and activity. The deer started to take on a keen interest in marking territory at scrape areas and licking branches. As the does and bucks, hierarchy was in the early stages of starting to be established. Our intel gathering intent is to concentrate on the bucks in our area, their numbers, their growth and antler characteristics, travel routes and tendencies, etc. So from now on, starting with our May trail camera reviews and going through September, we're going to focus on the bucks, watch them mature, follow their travel habits, their travel routes, and other tendencies from late spring through early fall. Now we'll include some pertinent trail cam doe data to balance out the full review here in central Wisconsin on our acreage. But again, our main focus is going to be to follow the bucks. So our final detailed data information that we're going to put together for you will be for the month of September. Now that will show the latest, greatest detailed data info for the fall bow season that that starts in mid-September. So let's get this review started. As the food plot continues to green up, the buck activity is steady. However, with more activity comes closer interactions. Here you can see the two does in the background moving off calmly together, while the two spike bucks are starting to establish their social order status. The bucks are starting to frequent the scrape and licking branch areas more and more. Now, the intel I take from these buck photos is their location in the food plot and the direction they enter and leave the food plot, thus giving me trail route info to pattern. It's nice to know what trails are preferred by the bucks. Now this is a little odd to me. This buck is nose to the ground, rubbing its face in the grass just outside of the scrape to the right under the marl trees. I've never seen this type of activity before. He then turns to the scrape area and begins scrape marking there. If anybody has any idea what this behavior is about, please share in the comments of this video. Now this doe or spike buck, it's kind of hard to tell from the blurred pictures, is obviously marking this scrape area by rub urinating. Now here's an example of some does visiting an over-scrape licking branch. Does will check out licking branch scents to try to determine the type of buck that left the scent. They will also leave scent markers on licking branches to attract bucks in the area. It's sort of like leaving their phone numbers for further contacts. I was a little surprised to see this type of activity this early in the year. 12 hours later, on the 23rd of May, we had some does return to check out the scrape area and licking branch. And it sure looked as if these two were certainly trying to outdo each other. Again, returning after dark on the 23rd, something or someone is bringing this doe back to this location to check out this licking branch and to leave her calling card again. Then, about an hour later, at the end of the day on the 23rd of May, this 4-point buck is nosing around, checking out all the ladies' scents. Here we have a spike buck in the foreground, moving across the food plot headed north. And there's a doe in the background, definitely leaving some sign. And it's good to see a small fawn, the first to show up on the trail cam. Now this concerned mom is watching for her fawn before they both move off to the southeast. There's also more nocturnal movement by the end of May as this 4-point buck checks out this doe. Then, early evening of the 29th, this 4-point buck, as you can see, has had some good antler growth already by the end of May. Well, he was hanging around the scrape areas in the food plot. Then he decided to scent this licking branch and remark his territory. A few minutes after he was done, this spike buck showed up to check it out. About an hour later, the spike buck was checking the scrape, and the 4-point came back, but no confrontation was captured by the trail cam. And to finish out the month of May, on the 31st, that doe and her fawn made another appearance. Buck activity decreased dramatically from May to June, dropping from 45.8% of all trail cam pictures in May to just 14.7% in June, a net reduction of 31.1%. But as you'll see on the rest of the upcoming June trail cam pics of bucks, that the antler growth really took off. Now the does were still interested in scrape areas and scrape area licking branches, as doe activity remained high, increasing in June to 85.3% of all trail cam photos, up 31.1% over May. Statistically, we lost 31.1% of trail cam buck activity, but we replaced it with an increase of 31.1% in doe activity. We were still getting food plot activity from the first fawn and doe. Plus, we got a trail cam photo of another pregnant doe yet to drop her fawn. And we had yet to get a coyote or timber wolf on our trail cams. So, all really good news for the survival rate of the fawns. Enough of the does. Let's get to the buck data. Take a look at this 6-pointer. It's only June 8th and his spread is already out to his ears. I think he's got the making of a really nice, thick-racked 8 or 10-pointer. Now, 3 days later, on the morning of the 11th, that thick 6-pointer showed up on the food plot trail cams. And he was playing a little hide and seek with the trail cam on the west end of the food plot. Now, he showed up later that day again in the food plot at dusk around 8 p.m. On the 14th of June, our thick-racked 6-pointer showed up on the trail east of the food plot. He is starting to show up on a regular basis around here. Do we dare to hope that this area is becoming the core area of his home range? Then, seemingly out of nowhere, in the early morning hours of the 18th, this big rack buck shows up in the southeast end of our food plot. Upon a closer look, this is definitely not our local 6-pointer. A zoomed-in close-up of his rack in this early morning grainy photo reveals what appears to be 8 points. And 2 days later, mid-morning on the 20th, this trail cam photo confirms it. We got a new sheriff in town. Later that afternoon, the doe with the fawn showed up in the food plot, and the new 8-pointer was there to check out the situation. But he just watched as the doe hustled her fawn away. Now, 2 days later on the 22nd, that 8-pointer showed up at dusk at 8:18 p.m. in the food plot with what I describe as the ghost buck. Now you can see a buck in the center of the screen on the first picture. And even though the picture of him is light and grainy, you can tell he has what appears to be a decent rack. Now in pic 1, the 8-pointer is to the left of the ghost buck. And by picture 2, he is to the right of the ghost buck. Now, by the third picture, the 8-pointer is still to the right of the ghost buck, but the ghost buck has disappeared. Now, all 3 pics have the 8:18 p.m. timestamp. That ghost buck appeared and disappeared in less than a minute. About 40 minutes after the ghost buck appearance, at 9:04 p.m., it looks like our local 6-point buck comes into the food plot from the southeast trail. Early the next morning at 6:46 a.m. on the 23rd, our resident 6-pointer is on the move. He's on the trail east of the food plot. My educated guess is he spent the night in the swamp sanctuary area just south of the food plot. The evidence is starting to add up that this just might be the core area of his home range. A little over an hour later, with the 6-point gone out of the food plot area, this spiked buck moves into the food plot to check out the action. Then, a few days later, late afternoon on the 25th, the new sheriff, the 8-pointer, shows up for a snack in the food plot. He makes one more late afternoon appearance in the food plot on the 30th at 4:05 p.m. as June draws to a close. Early July showed more fawns with does. Here are 3 fawns trailing a doe at 1:56 a.m. on the 2nd of July on a trail east of the food plot. And later that morning, we have a doe and 2 fawns in the food plot area. In fact, 13.8% of all pictures taken in July and August were of fawns, which is a promising data development for the future of our deer herd. Now, unfortunately, we have some additional negative intel gathered for the months of July and August, which showed a 57% reduction from June in total trail cam photos taken. Now, of those photos taken over the 2 months, doe and fawn were at 89.8%, while bucks accounted for only 10.2%, showing another buck activity decrease from June of 4.5%. Now, even though the buck trail cam activity was in decline 3 months in a row, quality bucks were still showing up on the trail cams. Anyways, you got a little intel background. Now let's check out the rest of July and August's trail cam pics. Now the previous pics showed an 8-pointer on the west side of the food plot. Now it looks like another 8-point shows up moving into the food plot area from the northeast where the doe and fawn are. Now he must have spotted the other 8-point in the southwest corner of the food plot and starts to move west along the north edge of the food plot. I'm guessing he doesn't want the confrontation. But check this out. As he leaves, other deer are moving in from the east. And a close-up review reveals what appears to be a third 8-point buck. As he moves in to feed in the food plot, you can see the 2 does looking back northeast. And you can see the other 8 points still moving west. Now with 3 8 points in the food plot area, the does and fawns both from the area. And a minute later, what those doe were looking at back northeast shows up. A fourth 8-point buck moves into the food plot and checks out one of the scrapes and licking branches. Now, what an intense activity in just a span of 5 minutes. About an hour later, this 8-point buck comes through the food plot area. And looking at that rack, he kind of resembles that last buck that was at the scrape and licking branch. Now, 7 days later, this buck shows up in the west end of the food plot with a doe in the background. But look closely at its rack. Check the outer tip and you'll see the starting of its 10th point on both sides. One of those 8 pointers is starting to grow into a 10 point, or we got another new sheriff in town. And that spike buck that showed up last month on the 23rd shows up now on July 8th, 15 days later, and it looks like his spike antlers are starting to split to become a 4-point buck. Now the buck lull sets in. 12 days go by without any trail cam buck activity. But early morning on the 20th at 3:07 a.m., this buck appears in the food plot. And with a closer look, it appears to be one of the 8 pointers. Now, no further buck action occurs on the trail cams in July, but there was plenty of doe and fawn activity all month long. And again, while in close quarters on the food plot, does start to be more aggressive. And we close out July on the 31st with this healthy doe munching on some nourishment in the food plot. Now talk about a buck pause on our acreage. This 6-point buck is the only, yeah, you heard me right, the only buck to show up on our trail cams in August, appearing on the 17th at 6:25 a.m. The last buck activity was on July 20th. That's 27 days without any bucks on our 8 trail cams. And with this being the only buck in August captured on film, it totals 1 buck over 42 days that shows up on our acreage. Just where did the bucks go for that 42-day period? We can only surmise that beans and corn planted by the surrounding farmers have attracted them as they seek out nourishment from food sources we don't provide on our acreage. For sure, a reason to be a little concerned, as by the end of August, we are about 2 weeks away from the opening of bow season. Now, there was enough doe activity around the month of August, but we are definitely starting to be concerned for our bow season buck chances. September ushers in the return of the bucks in a big way, as 28.8% of all trail cam pictures were of bucks. That's an increase of 18.5% over the lean July and August buck activity. In fact, this month had the second highest percentage of trail cam buck photos over the last 6 months. Great news as the fall bow season starts in a little over 2 weeks. Now, doe activity is down over the July-August timeframe, coming in at 70.7% of the trail cam photos, a decrease of 19.1%. But the doe to buck ratio is coming in at about 2.5 does for each buck, a little lower than we had hoped for at the beginning of spring. But we'll take a deeper dive into the September intel later to prep for our bow season. But for now, let's check the September buck photos from the trail cams. This 8-pointer showed up early morning on the trail east of the food plot on September 2nd. Now, 2 days later, this 8-point cruised into the food plot, checking out these 3 does. About 45 minutes later, I'm not sure if this is the same buck. Anyways, he shows up to mark his scent at the scrape and licking branch in the center of the food plot. As he disappears, just 2 minutes later, these two does show up, and one of these sure shows interest in that 8-point buck scent in the scrape area. Later in the evening at 9:30 p.m., still on the 6th, this 8-point buck cruises along a trail just east of the food plot. Then, on the 8th, under the early morning cover of darkness, this 8-point moves in on a trail northeast of the food plot. And later that morning at 6:02 a.m., this 8-point follows on the same trail. Then, later in the evening of the 8th, at 7:16 p.m., this 10-point checks out the mock scrape licking branch. About 2 3/4 hours later, this 10-point walks through the west end of the food plot. A half hour later, I presume it's the same 10-point, returns to the mock scrape and licking branch, leaving his calling card. He then moves to the other scrape area in the middle of the food plot, working that licking branch and scrape, before moving off around 11:11 p.m. Now, within a half hour, around 11:30 p.m., what appears to be an 8-point buck is checking out the center of the food plot for scent on those licking branches. The next day, daylight buck activity returns to the food plot with this 5-point front and center. But the real treat is in the background. Check out the buck I nicknamed Tall Boy. As best as I can tell, he's an 8-point stud. As of now, at least for me, that's my target buck for sure. A little over an hour later, we have an encounter between this 4-point and a spiked buck on the trail northeast of the food plot. All it takes is an eye-to-eye confrontation, and the spiked buck heads west under the watchful eye of the 4-point. 20 minutes later, that spiked buck shows up in the food plot. The next day, this 10-point is browsing at the deli on the west side of the food plot. And 5 days later, on the 15th at 5:38 a.m., it looks like Tall Boy is hot on the trail of a doe northeast of the food plot. Over the next couple of days, bucks are moving under the cover of darkness, but with the rut around the corner, confrontations are becoming more numerous. And the confrontations begin to carry over to daylight hours. After the testosterone levels subsided, only minutes later, check out this target-rich environment that presented itself in the food plot. Now the bucks continued to move about the area on the food plot and on trails through the end of September. And even the does were busy checking out the buck scents. Looks like everything is falling into place for the RO360 crew's fall bow season. Let's take a look at the September trail cam data intel. Now here's a peek into my note-taking while doing the intel review on the 8 trail camera pictures for the month of September. It starts out with a date listing 9/1 through 9/30 and a daily account of the doe, fawn, and buck trail cam photo activity. Also, the general area and time. Then that data breaks down into my time period chart. Now, as you can see on the time period chart, I've broken the 24-hour daily period into 4 time periods. Period 1 runs from 6 a.m. until 10:59 a.m. Period 2 runs from 11 a.m. until 2:59 p.m. Period 3 starts at 3 p.m. and runs till 7:59 p.m. And period 4 starts at 8 p.m. and runs until the following morning at 5:59 a.m. Now, this can break down the day a little more specific and tell me when the deer are most active during certain points of the day. Now, if you look at the chart a little bit, obviously the D represents doe pictures, and the circled number indicates buck pictures, and the rack size is the number inside the circle. Now, that info is further broken down into additional intel data categories that we take into account for putting together the final pieces of the puzzle that hopefully put the percentages in our favor for our fall deer hunts. So let's take that deeper dive into the intel and find out what additional info other than pictures this data set provides. First, our focus is on bucks. So I data mined our intel camera pics for the following buck intel. Now, this first data set is showing buck activity in the food plot versus trail areas according to rack size. Let's look at the shooter bucks, the 8 and 10 pointers. As you can see, the 10 pointers favored the food plot by a 77.8% to 22.2% of the photos, while 8 pointers slightly favored trail activity over the food plot by a 57.6% to a 42.4%. But overall, for all 8 and 10 point shooters, the food plot and trail cam photos were evenly split at 50% apiece. Next, let's dive into the rack size intel on all bucks. Now, 8-point photo activity was at 48.5%, which far outpaced all other bucks. And the shooter bucks, 8 and 10 pointers, totaled 61.8% of all buck photos. Another interesting intel data point was that the smaller 4-point and spike bucks accounted for 30.9% of the photos taken. Looks like a nice class coming up in a couple of years. Next, all buck activity by time periods. By far, the largest concentration of buck photo activity was period 1, which is the morning, from 6 a.m. to 10:59 a.m. with 60.3%. And in September, 60+% of buck trail cam photos were taken during shooting hours. And we take a deeper dive into data mining period 1 to show the 8 and 10 point activity on an hour-by-hour basis. Note that all activity for shooter bucks in September occurred between 6 a.m. and 9:59 a.m., with the 7 a.m. to 7:59 a.m. time slot being prime time. An interesting side note for the period 1 is that it had 64% of all deer trail cam activity and 30.9% of big buck activity. Let's take a quick peek at some doe intel. First up, doe trail cam photo activity by far showed up on trail activity at 68.1% versus 31.9% on the food plot in September. Number 2, the time period number 1 from 6 a.m. to 10:59 a.m. had the most doe photo activity at 65.6%, and doe activity during shooting hours was at 74.2% versus 25.8% during non-shooting times. And finally, number 3, Doe activity during the most active time period, number 1, which was the morning, showed the 7 a.m. to 7:59 a.m. time slot as prime time to harvest does, but you still had a decent chance between 6 a.m. and 9:59 a.m.
Now you just got a good look at how I data mine our trail cam photo activity info. Now there's a lot more information that you can glean from your trail cams than just getting a picture of a buck or a doe. Now for instance, some of the information that I didn't include here on the package, but I did glean this information, was what trails were the most active on the property. And also what trails were most active as the deer came into the food plot and left the food plot. That tells me I will set ambush points along those trails coming in or leaving the food plot. Number 3, another piece of information that I gleaned was what time of the day was the food plot most active. And one other thing that was a little bit of a surprise, I was surprised how quickly the deer can acclimate themselves to hunting pressure. I started checking mid-September as to what days of the week I had the most trail cam photo activity. And once the hunting season started, within a very few days, I had noticed already that Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays showed the most trail cam photo activity. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Mondays, not so much. It was a drastic change. But it just goes to show you how quickly the deer can acclimate themselves to the hunting pressure. So, what you want to do is don't just look at the photo on your trail cam. Data mine those photos for additional information, because the more you can put the percentages in your favor, the more chances you're going to have success in the fall bow woods.
Be sure to join us on our next episode as RO360 crew member Kevin Pitzel is first up with his fall bow hunt. Check to see if Kevin's arrow ends up on target.
Hey, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video. Feel free to comment below, or if you don't want to comment in the public eye, we can also be reached at rapantoutdoors360@gmail.com. Now, if you know somebody you think might enjoy this video series, please feel free to go ahead and share this video or this link with your friend. And as always, whether you fish or hunt, remember, practice CCR. Catch, conserve, replenish. Make sure that that resource is available for future generations. See you next time, guys.